The Complete Voodoo, Volume 1, Part 1. Edited by Craig YOE, introduction by Mike Howlett. Greetings, friends, and welcome to Part 1 of The Complete Voodoo, Volume 1, edited by Craig YOE. This is from IDW and YOE Books, 2015. And this is volume 1 of 3 volumes. There were a total of 3 volumes for the Voodoo series that came out. The cover here is fantastic. However, this cover is part of a latter issue of Voodoo. It is not in the first 6 issues, which this volume covers. So I'm not quite sure why they put this on the cover, but it's a great cover. So let's take a look inside, shall we? And here we have the inside covers with blow-ups of a couple of the characters or creatures that lurk inside the stories of Voodoo Volume 1. Needless to say, the date ended badly. This is the man of the hour right here, folks. That is Robert Farrell from a photo taken in 1974. Farrell was the publisher behind such great pre-code horror comics titles as Haunted Thrills, Strange Fantasy, and of course Voodoo. So we begin with an intro. Who do that voodoo? This is an interesting intro. There are a couple of glaring omissions, which we'll get to shortly. With the bombastic dominance of superheroes over the last half-century, it's hard to believe that in the early 1950s, horror was one of the most popular comic book genres. Dozens of horror titles were released every week, bulging the comic racks with repulsive reading, a veritable smorgasbord of sanguinary scares. EC Comics jump-started this phenomenon with their lineup of well-written, impeccably illustrated horror titles from Tales from the Crypt, etc. No, that's not true. EC did not jump-start the phenomenon. American Comics Group, with Adventures into the Unknown, came well before EC. Atlas Comics and Stan Lee started up their horror comic book series many months before EC Comics. And of course Avon, which came out with the first bona fide horror anthology comic book, Eerie #1 in 1947. So they all beat EC to the punch. Great photo here. This is Jerry Iger. And that is the lovely Ruth Roach, who would be the editor for Iger Shop. And Iger Shop had a lot to do with Farrell Publications. Of course, Iger Shop artists worked on Haunted Thrills, Strange Fantasy, Voodoo. And a lot of those artists were doing a ton of work in the 1940s, including Matt Baker, famous for The Women. Let's put it that way. He had a way with drawing very hot women in the 1940s Golden Age comic books. Here we go with a cover of Seven Seas Comics with a Baker cover. And so he ended up working for Iger Shop. He was part of the Iger Shop crew in the 1940s. Stepping up to the plate with a planned trio of terror titles, Farrell struck in mid-1952 with Haunted Thrills #1, Strange Fantasy #2, and Voodoo #1. All 3 titles proclaimed a Farrell publication on their covers, but unlike the other 2, Voodoo's indicia listed the publisher as 4-star publications. Farrell comics are now often referred to as Ajax-Farrell, or simply Ajax, which later became the most common among his many imprint names. Farrell's dip into the horror waters was tentative at first. The early issues of Voodoo are more of a horror jungle hybrid than straight horror. Now that is true, as we will see when we take a look at the first 3 issues here in this volume. This is one of those holy grails, in my opinion, folks, right here. It is the Voodoo Annual, the rare and repulsive Voodoo Annual from 1954. It's 100 pages, folks. 100-page comic book. Now, this is, needless to say, another hot issue. It goes for thousands of dollars in very good condition. I have been looking. It's one that I would definitely love to get my claws on. And they talk about various things here. The various stories that were reprinted in Erie publications in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, which were glorified, as they're talking about here. Ezra Jackson gives the Ghost and Voodoo number 5's The Spiteful Spirit his trademark ripped cheek. Oh yes. And they talk further about the various things that they did to push the horror a bit more on the original tales, like just making characters look more horrifying, as in Ghoul for a Day. That was the original, Ghoul for a Day. And as you can see, it's just kind of like a rather ugly old woman that's yelling or screaming there. So they took this, the original, and they ended up doing that to it. More Matt Baker. This is, of course, some great Matt Baker art originally from 7 Seas Comics. He also conspicuously omits Robert Webb from the dialogue as far as artists that worked for Iger Shop, and he did a ton of work on the Ajax-Farrell titles, Haunted Thrills, Strange Fantasy, and so forth, and Voodoo. Check out that beauty. That is just an awesome cover for Voodoo number 1, May of 1952. 1952 Voodoo number 1, artist Matt Baker. This is a reprint from a late 1940s comic book. Unmistakable Baker art. He knows how to draw the women. Muted murder throbbing like a primitive drum offers a haunting dirge as an eerie tale of death comes in broken whispers from the shelf of skulls. Now, this is the story they were talking about that was a reprint from an earlier Golden Age comic, 1946, I believe. And the artist is Robert Webb on this. That's the attribution here, 1952. Not a particularly exciting splash page, folks. Trademark Robert Webb circular panels. He's got a thing with the legs, folks. And it's good. There's an outright horror tale right here. And this is, I believe it's Robert Webb again. They have artist unknown. Voodoo, fact or fancy? Take a look at the top story. My first experience with the unknown was as a boy at the bedside of my ill grandfather. At 5:30 in the afternoon, he warily remarked, "Another half an hour." We waited. The clock struck 6. Grandfather closed his eyes, dead. The clock stopped and never ran again. It was then I began to wonder about the mysteries of the beyond. Next up, The Haunted One. Artist unknown, but I'm gonna say this is probably Robert Webb again. On to issue number 2 of Voodoo from July of 1952. This cover is one of my favorite Voodoo covers, and it fetches the big bucks, no doubt about that, because it is just a fantastic cover. For a long time, I thought this was Matt Baker, right? I mean, you've got, looks like a Matt Baker female, kind of. But then I started looking at it a little closer, and I think this is a Robert Webb cover. It is possible that because Robert Webb and Matt Baker worked for Iger Shop, maybe they collaborated on this. I mean, that was something that, because Iger Shop kind of worked as a factory, it is very possible that Baker and Webb did a collaboration. Zombie Bride. Love can sometimes turn to hate and horror. And Joe Farnsworth had to make the most terrible decision of his life when he found out he was on a zombie honeymoon. Yeah, that would be kind of frightening. I believe once again the artist is Robert Webb. He just has that classic, when you think about the 50s, maybe the late 40s into the 50s, the way a lot of characters are drawn, this is classic Robert Webb stuff here, folks. He's got these zombies, right? And they're walking around. They have the hats on, shadowing their faces. Very atmospheric, very creepy. The Antilla Terror, artist unknown. Very good color reproduction from the original comics by YOE Books IDW. A one-pager on witch doctors. It's kind of nice. Artist unknown. Idol of Death. Yeah, I'm not sure who the hell did this. I don't know. It looks like it was a rush job. Let's put it that way, folks. Horror in the Hills. This is Matt Baker art from July 1952. Horror in the Hills. What could stop this brute who escaped the dead and sought to mingle with the living? And here we are with Voodoo. Issue number 3 from September of 1952. An Iger shop cover, and this could very well be Robert Webb. We begin with a game called Dying. He mates and checks and slays, and one by one, back in the closet lays. A rather large severed hand holding onto the canoe there, while gators munch on this guy's leg. They didn't have any problems, as you can see, with blatantly severed hands, like you can see where the guy's hand got chopped off. Many times, though, they just wouldn't put blood in there. They stopped short of putting the blood dripping from the stump or from the hand itself. Now this one is pretty damn hilarious. I love it. Plantation of Fear. Dreadful legends about the mandrake root are as old as time itself. One story is that it screams when uprooted. Another is that its juice is deadly poison. Oliver Claxton laughed at all such silly tales. Yet he lived and died horribly to find out why his ancestral home was called Mandrake Manor. Folks, it's a case of the terrifying tubers here in Plantation of Fear. Grabs the freaking mandrake root and it's like, ah! I could see where Ruth Roach probably wrote this. A lot of her stuff was tinged with a certain amount of comedy. The green horror comes to mind about the cactus that falls in love with this woman and kills the man, the husband, and crushes the woman in a loving embrace at the end. Tom, up here, help! Here comes the tuber. Arrgh. Congo Terror. Now this has Robert Webb all over it, folks. That's a Robert Webb skeleton. That's a Robert Webb woman. There ain't no doubt about that. There's Peril in Perfection. She was flawless to a point, but it only led to a horror that was worse than violent death. Now, you know, as you can see, there's a guy with an axe. He's chopping her up. She apparently is some kind of a robot. Wow. And she has that robotic look. That is just perfect. And that brings us to Voodoo number 4, folks. And that will conclude part 1 of a look at Voodoo volume 1 from YOE Books and IDW. The next part, part 2, will deal with Voodoo issues number 4 through 6. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and as always, please like and subscribe. Thank you.